May I have your attention? Please welcome back TechCrunch Editor-at-Large, Mike Butcher.
Hi, everybody. How are we going? Are we okay? Are you still going? This is the last day. Did you have lots of coffee? I've had lots of coffee, and as you can tell, I have. It's been a fantastic day today on the security stage, and I'm going to do the shortest of intros because the next session is going to be a real must-watch. It's all about cybersecurity, Trashfires, the nightmare things that happen, what you can do about them. And to introduce this panel is our fabulous Zach Whitaker. Round of applause, everybody.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you all here. It's not every day that you're on stage with three of the sharpest security experts in their fields to talk about when things go wrong in cybersecurity. And so I thought we'd start this panel with a bit of fun. I asked each of our panelists to discuss an item related to cybersecurity that represents a situation where something went wrong or a near miss, and what we can learn from it. After all, what we learned from yesteryear can help us understand and be more secure in the future. Lesley, I'd like to start with you. Could you introduce yourself and the item that you've brought?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lesley Carhart. I'm a director of incident response at an industrial cybersecurity company called Dragos. I've been doing industrial cybersecurity for about 15 years professionally full-time. And prior to that, I was in the United States Air Force. And I am an incident responder by trade. I walk into trash fires and I figure out ways to deal with them and help organizations recover. So what I have brought today is a first aid kit. And the reason why I've brought that is because the most sad thing that I see in my work is companies and organizations that have not prepared to have a cybersecurity incident because they thought they couldn't be victims. They were too big, too small, too uninteresting. And they never made any preparation for something going catastrophically wrong. And that's why I have a first aid kit, because you don't want to go out and buy one of these when you've cut your hand cooking. That would be a very unfortunate day. We buy these in advance and we put them in our closet and hopefully make sure they're maintained so that if we, goodness forbid, cut our hand cooking, we can just go grab this and put things back together. So we don't think the same way, though, unfortunately, in cybersecurity, and I see that perpetually, and it costs people a lot of time and grief and money. Thank you.
Sherrod, what have you brought?
I have brought gift cards because the gift card economy is fascinating. And if you've ever gotten a text message that says it's from your CEO and they need you to go buy gift cards, or are you still interested in selling that property, this is where it all leads. And the gift card economy is incredible. And I've seen some really wild things happen, including victims being socially engineered by gift card fraud, and employees at retail establishments begging them not to spend $1,000 or $3,000 on buying gift card after gift card, and watching as these victims go from retailer to retailer to retailer, buying the maximum amount of gift cards they can get because they think that their employer has told them to do that. So my name is Sherrod Degrippo. I'm Director of Threat Intelligence Strategy at a software company called Microsoft, and this is one of the worst trash fires I've seen.
Thank you.
And
Rachel.
those are live gift cards, right?
These are live gift cards. They will be available after the panel, and you can see how much might be on them.
All you have to do is give us your password. Hi, my name is Rachel Tobac. I am the CEO of SocialProof Security. We are a social engineering prevention company. And I'm an ethical hacker. This is my item. It's a security key. It's pretty small, so probably look up on the screen. Specifically, it's Zach's security key. He gave it to me so I could use it for the show and tell here. And the reason why I selected this is because this little item is the one thing that I would recommend to make it much harder for me to hack into your company. In fact, the stories that we've seen in the news recently from companies getting breached because their multi-factor authentication token was stolen, social engineered oftentimes out of them by somebody over the phone or text message, this would have protected them right there. It cannot be phished out of you. So this, leveling up your multi-factor authentication, I'm sure we're going to be talking about this today, is my item.
Thank you. So, Lesley, incident response, and when you have a plan, how important is it to have a plan ahead of an incident and to plan and to ensure that you have an idea of what to do when you respond to an incident?
So I tell my salespeople at my organization I am the worst person to go out and sell things for our company because I'm trying to save people money. When I come in to see people doing incident response, I'm seeing them on their worst day ever. It's really, really sad. They are in a crisis, people are screaming, they're stressed out, they're yelling at each other, people are swearing about stuff because they're losing a bunch of money and they didn't think that this was ever going to happen to them. And in most cases, they didn't adequately prepare for it. And if I could tell organizations, small or large, something in advance, it's you do not want to pay me at my hourly rate, my organization's hourly rate, to do things like build a basic plan for who to call and what regulatory compliance you need to have planned for if you have a cybersecurity incident or a data breach. You don't want to have me build your network map or your asset inventory. And I exclusively do incident response in industrial environments like power plants, manufacturing facilities, water treatment plants, trains, like really critical stuff. And I'm coming in there and having to do those fundamentals because nobody's ever planned for those problems. Nobody's ever done that. And now it's not the intern doing that. It's me at my hourly incident response rate because it has to be done. Before I can start doing the detective work and figure out what happened and figure out how the intruders got in and how to clean it up, I need to know like what computers you have and what laws you need to comply with. I need answers to those questions, and if you haven't written them down somewhere, if you haven't spent the time and the resources and built a project around that, somebody has to do it. It's going to be me. And you don't want to pay for that, I promise. You want to pay me to do the stuff that I need to do, which is the forensics and the nifty CSI stuff.
So with gift cards, how does that work? I recall some years ago getting a phishing email from someone who looked like my CEO at the time. But can you tell us a little bit more about how this kind of scam works and how it affects people?
Sure. Gift card fraud is really fascinating to me because it goes after both consumers, but it also hits enterprise users. If your CEO is in the news, you're highly likely to have your employees be under one of these gift card fraud attacks very quickly because they can go see who that CEO is, what their name is, and start sending text messages to your employees saying, I need you to go buy gift cards. You can expense them later. It's really important. So they instill that sense of urgency, which that's the basis of social engineering, is instilling an emotional state where you start doing things you wouldn't normally do. And I've seen instances where we're watching as someone's going from retailer to retailer trying to buy more and more gift cards because they think their CEO is asking them to and pushing them to get it done. We've even seen employees at the retailers send emails to their boss saying, I know this person's being scammed, but they're demanding I buy them the gift cards. And props to the large retailers because many of them have said, don't sell them. Tell them to go somewhere else. We don't want to be involved in this person being defrauded. Something that's always interesting to me as well is why do these threat actors want gift cards at all? Do they want to use them to buy things? No. Gift cards are a currency store. You can go on the gift card trading sites and see who gets the closest to $1 to $1. So if I buy $100 in certain gift cards, I can resell those for 90 or 95% of their value. And different kinds of gift cards have different value. Apple iTunes is usually number one.
All right. And so security keys. Now, I obviously have one. That is my security key. Tell me, and the folks in the audience, why they're so important, and especially as they pertain to phishing as well.
Absolutely. Oftentimes, folks are tricked into giving up their password, and then right after, on the next screen, they get tricked into giving up their multi-factor authentication code, that second step you use when you log in. A lot of times people think, we have single sign-on, we have multi-factor authentication. Isn't that enough to protect us? And in some cases, for some attacks, maybe. But for many attackers, and they're getting really good at this, they're able to siphon out that multi-factor authentication code from you. And so the security key, and now we have pass keys, which I'm sure we'll get into as well, which is essentially A biometric that you use to unlock your device can now also get you access to the websites and services that you use. These passkeys and these FIDO security keys make it so that this second step can't be stolen from you. It's essential.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing these in. It's a great selection, and each one of these items has real security value. There seems to be this never-ending list of cyber threats, and the information deluge can be really quite a lot. What recent trends should the security community and the startup community really be focusing on? Sherrod, could we start with you?
Well, I think the hard part about that question is when we talk about trends, I think most of us generally go back to security basics. We're typically still singing the praises of, some of the original foundational things. I think that's really important. But I think from the attacker's perspective, what we're seeing, especially in crime right now, is this use of all kinds of different tactics and combining them. I think that social engineering combined with technology allows threat actors to social engineer at scale. So what might have been a one-to-one conversation they were having, they can leverage great technology to make that a one to hundreds, tens of thousands, millions of victims at once. And I think that that's what we're going to see, especially with things like with AI. It's not necessarily about fully generative. It's about the scalability that threat actors have available to them now.
Rachel, when it comes to social engineering, as the expert in this area, can you speak a little bit in terms of the tactics that are being kind of used these days against organizations and companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So as an ethical hacker, I have to have my tactics match what we're actually seeing the criminals do. And the big thing that we're seeing a huge increase in 2022 and 2023 is text message and phone calls being the very start of the attack. And this is something that I'm sure we're going to get into in detail today. For instance, what we're seeing in Vegas right now, we're not going to name names of companies, but I'm sure we're all aware of what's going on in Vegas right now, has been brought to its knees from a ransomware attack. We know from the SEC filing that it started with a social engineering call. Now, oftentimes we're seeing these start with phone calls to a service desk, a help desk, or just a client-facing employee who gets this call from IT support. Of course, it's the bad actor, and they're attempting to gain access to their password and MFA, or they're attempting to reset access to an admin account. That's what happened in Vegas. And so this type of issue, these attacks coming in through phone calls and text messages, have always been around, but we've seen a massive increase recently because the technical tools that we use for spam and phishing filtering, through email, have gotten so strong that the attackers are now going back to basics, saying, hey, I guess we'll just do this over the phone or text message now, try and circumvent some of those technical tools.
Lesley, in your world, you work a lot with really critical infrastructure organizations that supply electricity, water, and so on, and other public services. Are you seeing an increase or decrease or change in how threat actors are targeting these systems, especially as it pertains to phishing and so on as well? There are, as you know, there are IT networks and OT networks. I'm sure we'll get into this more. Can you tell us about how these are affecting those critical infrastructures?
Certainly, and my colleagues have really nailed it. I mean, we mostly agree on a lot of these things. They're very smart people. So I'll reiterate some of these facts because they apply to the industrial, the OT space as well. Hackers have been taking the path of least resistance. It's not all whiz-bang, malware, exploits, things like that. They are still exploiting exposed systems. They're still taking advantage of stolen accounts where there's no multi-factor. They're still doing social engineering. All of those things are still effective because people miss the basics when they're drawn into the allure of whiz-bang sales pitches about next-generation AI, ML products, which they don't have the humans to implement, and they're not doing those foundational things. And the hackers are lazy. They are efficient. They are part of organizations that exist most of the time to either do a geopolitical thing or make money in a very, very efficient way. They have small margins too, and those have gotten worse for them as the economy has had trouble over the last year. So we see less haphazard attacks and much more targeted attacks. We're seeing more attacks against critical infrastructure because It's generally less mature in a cybersecurity stance. And also, those are organizations that have to function for society, so they are more likely to pay up if they're ransomed or extorted. So we're seeing potentially less overall attacks, but much more efficient use of tools, as you mentioned, and much more effective mass attacks and sale of credentials on the black market because, again, path of least resistance, most efficient attacks possible. We're seeing it too.
I want to bring up a tweet by Heather Adkins, one of Google's top security engineers, who was responding to a question about unpopular cybersecurity opinions not so long ago. Adkins said, and I have to quote this verbatim, it's too good, frankly, "The cybersecurity industry shouldn't exist. We built the internet wrong, and we can solve most of our cybersecurity problems at their root by re-architecting technology platforms to be safe by default instead of buying security products." That was an unfortunate turn of phrase. Do you agree, Lesley? Do you agree with that?
I mean, I think all of us wish we could put ourselves out of a job. It's never going to happen because in OT and IT, the internet has to exist for society to exist as we've grown to expect. These tools need to be connected to networks to function at the efficient way our society, our just-in-time economy, and our society with our modern conveniences and efficiencies demands that we are interconnected. So we can't just take it all away and rebuild it. We can't do that. But where we can build in security into the new things we're developing, that's critical going forward to not have that tech debt that we're dealing with now. We will be dealing with that tech debt forever in terms of the broader internet and technologies that we've built upon over the last several decades. But yeah, we can't go back and tear it all down. I understand. Heather is wonderful, and I concur. I mean, we all would like to work ourselves out of a job.
What do you think, Sherrod?
Oh, I strongly disagree. I think that's just not operating within a reality that also includes humans. I think that when there's human fallibility in the world, in a system, that those humans will always be targets for things. And I do strongly believe that we have a really big responsibility in enterprise to take care of things before they get to the level where we need to call government. I think that if we're really, really doing our job, that a lot of that actually won't be as necessary, because in enterprise and in product, we should make secure products that can stop these things. But I just don't think that any system that involves humans is ever going to be fully secure. It's just not a real way of seeing the way that people operate. They're human. That's why I like them.
To your point, Rachel, earlier, there are so many companies doing all the right things. They're using single sign-on, they're using multi-factor authentication, and yet we have seen, as you mentioned, some really big companies get hacked in recent weeks, hotel giants, casinos. What can we learn from those particular incidents?
Sure. I think the thing is that people get into this mindset, and I think we've talked about this here, they have the products and tools in place, and so they believe we're good. We should be good to go, right? We've invested the money, we've invested the time, but unfortunately, just because you have single sign-on, it doesn't mean that every service, every tool is using single sign-on to help log your users in. Think of all the websites that they go to in a workday that don't work with single sign-on. And then think about the multi-factor authentication tool that they have. Does it match their threat model? If they have admin access, I recommend that we move away from SMS two-factor, away from even app-based, and towards something like a small group of folks who have security keys or pass keys, if you have admin access. Now, that's not a match for everybody's digital literacy or everybody's budget. And so we can only do so much sometimes with the budget that we have available. And the thing that's really missing, the crux, is the human-based protocols. Ask yourself internally, think about your company. When somebody calls you and says they're IT support, how are you supposed to verify that person is who they say they are? What if they say they're someone from finance and they're supposed to wire something and they need some details about a bank? What if they say that they're an internal employee and they need to reset their account because their phone fell in the toilet and now they don't have their multi-factor authentication? we have to really penetration test and think through what are the questions that our team is going to be asked from a human perspective, and what protocols can we bake in to their experience? Because humans are allergic to feeling awkward. We will do everything we can to just do our job nicely and well without making it frustrating for the person we're talking to. So we have to give people the protocols to actually use at work. And that's missing from almost every organization. And groups like Lapsus and Alpha, sometimes called Scattered Spidered, I guess, they know that. They know that that's a soft spot for many organizations.
Can I mention something about that too?
Please do, yeah.
I think that that's important, and I also think that we have to understand who's actually being attacked within our organizations. I've seen a lot of organizations simply VIP their execs and they're done, and that is the worst way to go about that. Just because someone has a high up title in the company doesn't mean that they're your biggest risk individual. And so I think the reality is, how often are those people being attacked? And that's where you have to prioritize your additional training, extra security measures, buying the full packages for those employees. And it's not necessarily CEO, CFO, it's an admin of finance that's been with the company for 9 months.
Or a very senior executive assistant who has access to all the calendars.
Exactly.
Or customer support, tier one.
Yes. Yeah.
So we have to think about who's being attacked in the organization, the threat actor groups that are attacking them, and how often they're getting those attacks, in addition to understanding that they need further protections.
I think there is something to be said about how much technology that we rely on. I think that's a given in this day and age. But we also rely on so much on other people's technology, open source code, even hardware. How can companies trust the technologies that they buy and use, Sherrod?
I think a big part of it is having the relationships. I am in a technical career, but I think that people are ultimately the thing that are most important there. You have to be able to look someone in the eye who's responsible for it. And you have to say you have a relationship with the engineering teams or the management teams or an account team that you really trust, that will be there for you when there is an issue. I think that the way that you trust your technology is you vet it with other technology. You understand the supply chain of the software that you've got in your environment. That's something that a few years ago, I wouldn't have worried so much about that, but I think software supply chain is one of the biggest issues we face now. Understanding, is this software being tampered with outside of the vendor even? So thinking about things about the personal relationship and then the technology relationship, that's what's going to help give you some confidence.
Yeah. There's a point in there of trust but verify as well. Trust the code to some extent, but verify that it does do the things that it's meant to do. Lesley, I mean, you've obviously worked with, so you've seen so many incidents over the years. Is there something that you can say to the technology that you've seen over the years? Is there a way that you can vet that technology better to make sure that it's not going to collapse, break, or be hacked?
So 2 points on that. The first one is, if you're not familiar with SBOM yet, Software Bill of Material, you should be if you're developing a software product. The concept there being you understand the components that go into your code because you borrow code and repositories from other places, and then you understand what goes into those and into those. We are all now dependent on code bases that came from other people all over the place, and if one of those is tampered with, it can have huge implications for our own products. So that's a really important concept that's up and coming. And the other one, again, I'll reiterate the trust but verify. In terms of architecting your environment, I see overly permissive trust in a lot of applications and partners and suppliers, which can lead to the type of supply chain compromises we're talking about. If you're going to bring in something that you cannot trust implicitly, then you need to build monitoring around it. You need to architect least privilege and segmentation around it. Understand that there's something you're bringing into your environment that could be a point of entry for an attacker.
We're still 2 or 3 weeks on from some of the major cyber attacks we've seen in recent weeks, targeting hotels and casinos. We're still none the wiser about what has happened. We have some ideas, we've seen some reporting, some of it from us at TechCrunch. But for a question for all of you, how does transparency about security events help future security efforts? Can we start, Rachel?
Sure.
Yeah.
We can't know how to defend if we don't know what the attack methodology was. That's why I think it's so important that we're really clear about exactly what went down during the hack, how it happened, what the initial point of entry looked like, how they pivoted. We need to know exactly what happened during that attack. And I actually want to give some positive shout outs. The only companies I'm going to name are the companies that I'm really saying that are doing a great job here today. In 2020, Twitter was hit with a really interesting social engineering attack. You probably remember. They called up customer support, pretending to be IT support, and they ended up getting access to the admin panel, and they wreaked havoc on a million different accounts that were high profile. And Twitter in 2020 was so forthcoming about what went down. They told us exactly day by day what they were catching, the remediation steps, how to notice these exact steps. And then we see other companies following suit and doing a great job on their blog too. Notably, I want to say Cloudflare did a fantastic job saying, hey, by the way, we got hit, but the YubiKey stopped it in the moment. And knowing exactly what prevented the hack from moving forward is so essential. So kudos to those teams for being so transparent in a hard moment.
I feel like there's such a stigma around security incidents and breaches, and transparency is so important, because it does help set the groundwork for future security efforts. But it doesn't have to be embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a shameful experience. We can learn from these experiences. Is that something you would agree with, Sherrod?
Absolutely. I think that you have lessons learned from a breach, and those lessons generally are surrounded by incredibly heightened emotions, and those emotions stay with you in the rest of your career. Hiring people who've been through big breaches, don't look at that as a failure. Look at that as somebody who has been on the front lines and been under fire. They know what to do and they've been through it, and I guarantee they have learned from it. I also think that it's very important that we have empathy for victims in terms of those IT teams, the customer support person that answered the phone, and they're just doing their job, like we've mentioned. Having empathy for these victims, and especially the IT people who are trying to figure it out, that was kind of their house, right? They see that as their responsibility to protect when you're in security operations. And now they're dealing with something they may have slightly missed. Could be some tiny little thing, could have been some little accident, and now they have to clean up after it.
Security takes a village. It takes a lot of work to do this. We actually started looking at the incident response to begin with. How much of the aftermath of an incident is what's remembered? It seems like that's the case, but how much can incident response actually feed into a positive outcome in terms of being able to disclose transparently what happened and what can be done in the future?
Yeah, so it's not just a matter of threat intelligence when people have this stigma that keeps them from talking about the cybersecurity incidents they've had. There's also this pragmatic answer of there are so many incidents going on that most of this audience isn't aware of. And again, I work in really critical infrastructure, like stuff that keeps the light on and clean drinking water and the trains running and manufacturing operating. There's incidents going on all the time that you don't hear about. And the problem is that since the executives who fund cybersecurity programs don't hear about them and they aren't in the newspaper, that prevents other organizations from getting the resources they need. If people were more forthcoming about talking about everybody can be a victim, I started with that. It can happen to anyone. You are not too big or too small or too wrong of a vertical. It can happen to anyone. If we talked about them more, not only would we know more about what the adversaries are doing, but organizations would be able to prepare for these incidents. They would have adequate people and funding and technology. But since we aren't talking about it, since it's all hush-hush because we're embarrassed, these things are going on and people are not adequately getting the resources they need to be ready for them to happen to anyone.
So with just a couple of minutes left on the clock, what areas of cybersecurity defense are currently underserved? Rachel?
This is a fun one for me. People often think because I have security awareness training as a part of a product that I offer that I'm going to say that that's the solution. And actually, that's not the solution. So that's kind of a funny thing for me to say. Training is one important piece of the puzzle. A lot of times when we see these attacks happen, we see folks talk about it in the news, they say, oh, we really need to train our people better. And sure, we should train people better. That's great. We should definitely do that. That's why I spend time doing that. But that's not the end of what we need to be doing with the people. people need the protocols. How do they respond to the people who text them? If they get a text and it looks like it's from their identity access manager, what should they do next? Should it be Slack somebody? Should they call somebody? Should they email somebody? They don't know. And that's why they end up clicking and they end up going through and giving their password and their multi-factor authentication code away. They need the protocols, not just training. They need both. And I think that's really severely lacking in the communication. When we see these giant breaches, it's not just train them, train them, train them. It's train them. Upgrade their technical tools. Do they have a password manager? Many companies still don't. Do they have a good multi-factor authentication method for their threat model? Most don't. And we need to make sure that they're ready to go with who do I talk to in these situations, the edge cases.
Well, look, thank you so much for being here. It just shows that a cybersecurity trash fire doesn't have to be if we're prepared for it and we can learn from incidents of yesteryear. So thank you, folks, so much for being here. Thanks.
Zach, pleasure.
Thank you.